to the Circularity Metrics and the Fair Use of Data session. I'm glad to see so many data enthusiasts here in the house today. My name is Marlene Ahonen, and I'm a project coordinator of circular economy here in Sitra. I'm also an engineer. Our Go data and metrics are really close to my heart, as it's nice to see that so many of you guys here is too. We have top-notch speakers here today discussing how data intertwines with circular economy. And during this session, we will hear about challenges and possibilities it holds from different angles and stakeholders, from societal, business, systemic, and consumer point of view. We have time for a few questions at the end of the session. So as you were going through the directions already here on the screen, you can find the session here in Restaurant Hall from the applications. So please fill all your interesting questions there, and I will go through a few of them at the end of the whole session. But now, are you all ready for some zeros and ones? Yay! Let's try once more. Are you all ready for some zeros and ones? Yeah! There you go. Okay, well, let's get this session started with a dialogue on two perspectives on circular economy. I want to invite on stage Mr. Hans Prenisch, the Executive Director of European Environment Agency. Hans has over 20 years of experience conducting and managing research in the areas of environmental politics, climate change, and sustainable development. And European Environmental Agency's key task is to build knowledge, monitor progress, and make sure policymakers have the understanding, data, and information they need to help guide the development of supportive and flexible policies. But I'm also pleased to invite Ms. Jaana Sinipuro, the project coordinator of human-driven data economy from Sitra. With her team, she aims to build a foundation for a consent-based method of fair data exchange and to set up European-level rules and guidelines for a new kind of data economy. Welcome both. But let's get this going. Well, Hans, how you see new measurement approaches support progress towards circular economy?
That's a great question, because I think we've got a lot of work there. And you asked for ones and zeros. I assume that I'm the zero here, and we will go to the one later. I think it's obvious that the circular economy is a really new concept. We think about keeping materials and their value in the whole production and consumption chain, the value chain. And for the moment, I think it's fair to say that we don't have the metrics in place. You know, we are still working on what you could call waste plus type indicators and data. And we are here and there working on some circularity data. We have some data at a macro level about materials in the economy. Eurostat is doing quite a bit of work there. We are focusing on waste prevention, all of that. But in the end, what do we really know about circularity? What do we really know about materials and how they are kept in the economy? What do we really know at the level of the consumer when it comes to that? I think it's fair to say very little. So innovation in this field will be critical. And we may have to think completely out of the box. And the box in European Union monitoring is often sovereign borders. Yeah, that's where we measure. Well, if we think of materials, they flow across borders in value chains. So we may have to reflect on new techniques and like blockchain to follow these material passports through the flow. We may need to come to consumers with an idea of what the material footprint is of a product they purchase, like we now do with energy for some products. It's a really different scheme. We are working on that. We are contributing to the exercise, but we need to network, come together, and find a sort of common ground on how we can illustrate circularity and where this is going.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Hans. Well, Jaana, how can fair use of data push both companies and the consumers towards circular choices?
Well, I agree with Hans that it's a very new topic, the circular economy, but also data economy, not to speak about fair data economy. So basically our everyday life generates lots of data. Digitalization is changing the production methods, and data is everywhere. But then we think that Europe could lead with an example built around the GDPR and data portability, enabling companies to have broader access to those different broad data sets, dynamic data sets you were mentioning, and also behavior data about our preferences and consumer behavior. So when we speak about fair data economy, we think that it's a very consumer, person-driven, consent-based data sharing. It's good for individuals to have transparency on data usage, but it also enables companies to have access to different data sources, and policymakers will benefit when there's clear guidelines and transparency on the data usage. So when we speak about fair data economy, we compare it a little bit to the early days of sustainability goals and sustainable reporting. Data usage should be fair and transparent as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Amazing answers, both of you guys. But if you look into the future a little bit, how you see that, how will data economy and circular economy intertwine in the future? And what are the possibilities they hold on taking each other forward?
Please. Yes.
I think we need to rethink production, manufacturing processes, and how the production goes. And for rethinking and innovations, we need more data, and data in digital forms. But also, this change, as I said earlier, needs more openness for the individuals, because the individual behaviors are, in the end, the way to promote these kind of things. So,
yeah. I think we will need data at the macro level. Is Europe becoming a more circular economy? That's we focus on Europe, and how does that relate to the world? And we're not there. We are working on it. We will launch a couple of reports pretty soon. More from less, even more from less, where we look at material inputs into the European economy. It will be published pretty soon. It was the key piece of work of a really great person in our agency who unfortunately passed away. So the whole product will also be a tribute to what he brought to this knowledge in Europe on circular economy. So we need it at that level, but we also need it at the level of companies along this value chain and how they can follow where they fit in the circular economy. And then we need data at the level of a consumer, but in a way that is transparent and not tricking and fooling people. I think it's fair to say that nowadays we use logos and symbols that suggest circularity, like these 3 arrows. They have very little to do with circularity, yeah? But they suggest circularity. And so we need to come with a scheme that translates data to a consumer in a clear way that is stimulating wise choices and that is not confusing people. So we don't need 12 additional labels. We need one way of communicating it. Just like nobody is able to sell a sea-level refrigerator anymore in Europe, nobody wants to buy that anymore. What do we know and what can we bring to consumers when it comes to material footprint of what they are consuming? A clear, simple, understandable, and a scheme that tells the truth about what is actually happening with materials.
yeah, I think that was exactly the point in our... A couple of weeks ago, we published a kind of policy brief for the roadmap, how the measuring and how this data economy, the European model for data economy would develop. And it started very much from the policymaker recommendations. And as you said, it goes across all levels in the society. So I think we need both those policy level measures and awareness building around the topic and importance on data and different kind of metrics. And also impact of new digital services and this new technology. You were mentioning blockchain earlier. It also has an effect on environmental use of resources, natural resources. So those are the topics that we need to discuss when it comes to this concept. But we also need a business ecosystems. We need to have like public sector examples on how to promote these new data sharing platforms and data sharing systems. So it's government authorities, it's companies, but it's also individuals. We who are willing to work on, or participate and work according sharing economy, sharing things that also needs data. So, and need of data combined with transparent use of data and creation of new metrics. I think that's a way to go.
There's actually a really interesting question right here from the audience. How to measure soft impacts of circular economy like social and mental health? That's a tricky one.
Hans, please.
I knew this was coming, so I was just reflecting on my own mental health in this circular economy. The way we frame this, and we're working on how this transition to a circular, low-carbon economy is connected to well-being. Yeah? And part of well-being is your health, and that includes your mental health. Part of well-being is, of course, the distributional effects in society that are taking place. Part of well-being is how you feel as an actor. Do you have agency in these big changes that everybody is talking about? You know, transitions in society. Do you feel like a subject, or are you an active participant in that? All of that for me has to do with well-being. And I think if we can make it clear to citizens that they are not only consumers in the first place, but also citizens, and that they have a stake in society, and that we support them in having that stake with the type of data that strengthens them and gives them agency and gives them power at their level over what they are doing. I think we are contributing to mental health and to well-being, because if we speak about systemic transitions, it may feel like a huge wave that is coming at people and they are just powerless subjects. That is not the goal of moving into a more sustainable society. A more sustainable society is a full society with people, with engagement, with commitment, with networks. So we should work in that direction, I think.
Yeah.
Well, you frame it very nicely. So I think that's inclusion and empowerment. Those are the main issues here, or topics here.
Excellent. Yeah, paradigm shift is most definitely not the most inspiring target to go towards. That needs to be some smaller steps there in between. Okay, here, let me see here. Oh, what kind of metrics do you have in mind to say if a country, company, person are circular? We will hear more about these really soon, but can you give insight? Let's see here. Oh. Okay. When are we tough enough to unite world's research institutes and make worldwide metrics for circularity?
Well, I'm a member of the International Resource Panel, and actually the Resource Panel came with a report that was presented at UNEA, the United Nations Environment Assembly, earlier this year, where there was a clear call for the development of a knowledge base, and a knowledge base includes metrics and indicators in support of this fundamental transition. It also made a link to the low-carbon economy and to protecting biodiversity. And I think at the global level, the message was clear. We need to work together to do this, and we also need a stronger global foundation, a mandate to do that. And part of that mandate, I think, could be a convention that anchors resource use and resource efficiency and circularity in parallel with what we have under the UNFCCC and under the UNCBD. Because it's sort of the third leg, and it's the leg that talks about production and consumption. So it's a really critical leg, and there are very few chairs that you can sit on that only have two legs. We need that third leg globally to work towards that. So in that report, I think there are very clear messages in response to that question.
Excellent.
And maybe at the local level, I think we have great examples from the cities, this open data, making data available for research. I think that's an open science approach. It's very important in this sense, that sharing data for the academic purposes, that's one topic where public sector can show example and promote the availability of the data.
If I may, I think we also need to bring it to where it really matters. Harbors, the biggest harbors in the world, they all have three key businesses. One is containers, the other one is carbon-based energy sources, and the third one is bulk goods, raw materials. If we, by 2050, go to a low carbon and a circular economy, what's the business model? It's a serious question for harbors. So the harbor of Rotterdam, for example, has a sort of vision on Rotterdam in that type of economy 2050 and what that would mean. This might serve as an example for other big harbor cities in Europe to move in that direction. That's when you bring it down to the level where decisions are made, where real economic interests are, where hundreds of thousands of people are at work, and they need a future in this new economy. And it's not going to happen by itself. It's not going to fall from the sky. So the better we understand the context and the metrics of the context, the wiser decisions I think we can make in the future.
Mm-hmm. And I agree that data-driven dialogues, the consumers in the cities, of course, they can push decision makers to be better in providing information about their choices and how sustainable the cities are. But cities also have a huge negotiating power. So if there's a data available for those dialogues with different vendors and different companies, maybe the cities are a very huge, big, important actor in with their negotiating power, promoting those good practices.
We still have time for final closing comments.
Okay, for me the most simple and fundamental metric is the following, that without a radical shift to a circular economy, there is no way we will live well on this one planet with 10 billion people in 2050, and there is no way we will ever reach our well below 2 degrees of the climate agreement in Paris. So it is absolutely essential that we take this circular economy seriously and we do it swiftly and we really move to a different model of material use.
Yes, I started by saying that these are new topics, both circular economy and data economy and fair data economy. But I think it's a perfect momentum to start merging the two topics and start speaking. Whenever we talk about data economy or we talk about circular economy, it's very healthy to think about data and potential with the data at the same time. So perfect timing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Healthy, fair data. That's what it is.
Right, thank you.
Big round of applause. So let's look into the societal level of measuring circular economy. I want to welcome on stage Mr. Arturo de la Fuente, the Deputy Head of Eurostat's Unit on Sustainable Development, Environmental Statistics and Accounts. Mr. de la Fuente has been leading the Eurostat work on circular economy, including the setup and maintenance of the EU monitoring framework for the circular economy.
Thank you.
Por favor. Yeah.
Microphone, please.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to be here. I am a statistician. My job is to do statistics about the EU and for the EU, and also to coordinate statisticians in the member states of Europe and beyond to produce these statistics. I was asked to come here to tell you about the work we are doing right now, lessons we have learned, and challenges that we are facing. So I will start right away with the first challenge, and it's, what's the circular economy for you? Actually, for each one of us, circular economy means a different thing. And this is, we are all on the same boat, but in practice, it means different things for different people, and this is something I saw very clearly in the last 2 days in the different sessions. And this matters profoundly when we talk about metrics. You need different metrics for each one of these things. So I want to show you in this diagram that has 2 scales, 2 axes. In the vertical axis, you have at the top individuals. This could be families, people, individual businesses that are promoting a new product, individual materials. And at the bottom, you have the global scale, the whole planet, planetary boundaries. We all agree the circular economy is a global thing. And in between, you have everything ranging from local authorities or initiatives, regional, country level, and you also have sectors like the automobile sector or the plastic sector globally. And then in the other axis, in the horizontal one, you have the environment, of course, and you also have economic aspects, such as scarcity of resources, economic incentives. We heard about the taxes and subsidies the other day, GPP, green global procurement, about regulation, about new materials, innovation, jobs, investment, all that matters here. And if you want to succeed in taking action, you need to consider environment and economy at the same time. If you take them isolated, you will have less success, I think. So, for instance, yesterday in the morning, we had the CEO of one company, IKEA, talking about one product, LED lamps. I would put that around here. Individual, one company, in the economic side. This morning, there was a session before about international trade in the circular economy. I would put about here. In parallel to this session, there are sessions about plastics and construction. To me, they are here in the middle, and they cover economy and environment. So you have to choose what the circular economy is for you in this diagram. And perhaps you can even find different spots where you would fit. So it can be very demanding to produce information and metrics for each one of these things. And for the whole, for the circular economy as a whole, you have to choose somewhere. And this choice is a different choice for each one of us. I'm going to claim that if you want to see the big loop of the circular economy, you have to be global, you have to get distance, you have to be far away. It's like seeing the Earth from the space. When you want to see that the Earth is round, you have to get distance. In our daily life, the Earth is flat. It's the same with the circular economy. So how can we see the big picture? I'm going to show you one example. There are other ways of seeing it. We know the story, the environment. We take resources from the environment. We transform them in products and energy in our societies. And eventually, we produce waste and air emissions. So this is a Sankey diagram of material flows in the European Union. This is real data of Eurostat, public data in the Eurostat website for 2016. For the whole European Union, that is almost a continent. So here we are seeing the big picture as big as it can be with the data we have in Eurostat. And what you can see is that we have domestic extractions of biomass, of metals, minerals, and fossil fuels for energy. We transform them into products, and we produce energy with it. And eventually, it goes into the air as emissions, or accumulates in our society as buildings and infrastructure, or it is exported, or it becomes solid waste. And a part of the solid waste is treated, and it goes back, closing the loop. At this distance, you can see the relative size of things. This is good. For instance, solid waste is not as big as you could thought. There are other bigger things in the diagram. So it's relatively small. It's the top of the iceberg, but there is an iceberg underneath this thing. In Europe, we treat and recycle about half of the solid waste we produce. This is higher for some materials, and lower for others, but about half of it. And this feeds back into the economy. However, when it feeds back, this half of the waste we recycle is only about a tenth of the whole materials demanded by our economies and our societies. How is it possible that it's so small? It's only 1/10. Actually, it's 11.7 in our statistics. Well, because you have all the stuff here. You have the food chain. We need food to eat. There is also food waste produced in the way. We have all the fossil fuels that produce emissions. We have our material footprint in form of exports and imports and international trade. And we have material accumulation here too, in the form of buildings, infrastructure, vehicles, things we accumulate in our lifestyles. So this indicator here tells you about the fraction that we are covering with closing the loop. We think this is a good indicator. It's an important one. It's also an SDG indicator in Europe, and we are trying to promote it more. How do we produce these statistics? We reuse existing data that was collected for other purposes. We integrate it into a framework that we call environmental accounts that uses international standards, also supported by UN, OECD, World Bank, and Eurostat. What is the flow of this diagram? Is that you don't see the people there. The people are hard to see. The same as if you are looking at the Earth from the moon, you don't see the people. You see the big thing, but you don't see. People do not find their individual actions in their daily lives into the global loop. So this is a problem to motivate people to also to know how we have to change our daily lives to help to contribute to the circular economy. Now I want to tell you something about the activities of the European Commission. We won an award this year about a package for the circular economy. One of the components of that was a monitoring framework. It's a monitoring framework with 10 indicators, some 21 sub-indicators in 4 areas. In production and consumption, we have indicators about the production chain of critical raw materials, green public procurement, food waste. In waste management, we have indicators about recycling rates for different materials. In secondary raw materials, we have indicators about the global loop that I showed you before and for several critical raw materials. And we also have indicators about competitiveness and innovation, about investment, jobs, and patents. This information is available in the website of Eurostat. You can follow this link, or you can Google Eurostat circular economy. And you have data, graphs, explanations, etc. So we have achieved a lot with this monitoring framework. We cover 4 different areas. We are satisfied as a first attempt to produce it, but we have challenges ahead. We want to see more details. We want to see the plastics. Where are the plastics in the big picture? We need to disentangle them from the fossil fuels. We need more information about regions and local information. For that, we cannot do everything. We need the help and cooperation of others. We already have information, but we want more and of better quality about innovation, new products, new technologies, jobs, and investments in the circular economy sector. So this year, we are not going to modify this monitoring framework. We have a new European Parliament and European Commission taking office. We want to wait for their feedback about how we can improve, but we want to fine-tune it a little bit with this top-down approach, enhancing detail, finding the plastics, using more models to fill gaps, and we want to observe other alternative approaches about data mining, citizen science, big data, etc., where we have less experience, others have more experience, and maybe more relevant at local level or at the level of companies. We believe that the business community can help here, local authorities, and also NGOs or organizations like Citra can help to provide oil to this community to develop these areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. La Fuente. And thank you for your work you've been doing on the monitoring framework. It's been amazing. Next, we will hear about circular metrics in action from the energy sector. I want to invite on stage Mr. Luca Meini, the head of circular economy and environmental strategies of Enel Holding. Enel has done an extremely interesting job by developing a method for measuring their circularity and adding it to their stakeholder collaboration. But without further ado, Mr. Meini.
I'll briefly introduce on how we have approached the issue of circular metering in the last 4 years. First, maybe it's worth to mention what's Enel business. Enel is a utility. We are the world's biggest private renewable energy producer and smart grid operator. And we have also a strong focus on the end user products and projects like electrical mobility, energy efficiency, and so on. So we operate in the field of energy, but in the broadest sense, from renewable to smart grid to electric mobility and home appliances. We have first moved to renewable like 6 years ago, so we made a strong choice on decarbonization. And afterwards, we decided to further improve on our approach, moving with a strong approach on circular economy. One of the first challenges we addressed when deciding to focus on circular economy was that of metrics. We could not do anything on circular economy without having a metric that could help us to set targets and assess what we are doing. So we developed a corporate-wide approach that we have implemented throughout all our business lines. Currently, we have implemented, if you want to conceptualize how we have implemented, we can consider that on one side, a strong focus on suppliers. Suppliers is a key driver for us for many reasons. One, it is that to understand how circular the company is performing, you have to have a clear picture of what is the input we receive from the suppliers. And the other, as mentioned also yesterday, it is that we can drive our suppliers to our improved circularity performances. As we have 8,000 suppliers and, of course, many millions of buying any month, this is a strong driver. The other lever we are operating on is that of the assets. Although we are an energy company, of course, we have a huge amount of materials because we operate a smart grid, renewable plants, and so on. So we are working on design, material, operation, and dismantling, because we are also dismantling thermal power plants as soon as they get out of operation. So this is a huge volume that we are trying to approach in a circular economy way. And the third aspect is about products and services to clients. This is another topic on one side, because clients' counterparts are really focusing on circular economy, so there is a strong demand on this. But it also helps us to better focus and improve on what we are doing. About procurement, this is a project we started 3 years ago. Actually, the idea was to have a metrics on the circularity of what we were buying. When I see, but it is a real metric, so it is really understanding from the raw material up to the final product, up to the end, what was the whole, the LCA, if you want, of energy and material. So we started this project. We started with some pilot categories like photovoltaic batteries, and step by step we are expanding. Meanwhile, we have also to be able to manage a huge volume of data to decide how to certify it. So it has become a huge project. We have also collaborated with the EPD, the Swedish platform. And we are now covering 60% of the negotiated amount we buy every year. The purpose, so as I mentioned before, is on one side to have a clear picture of the overall circularity of the company. On the other is to also set the K factor in our tender in order to push our suppliers to improve their performances. And this is also a metric basis on which we can make co-innovation with suppliers, because often to let suppliers to be more circular, you have also to reconsider your requirements. So this is a sort of collaboration phase. And we plan to cover all our suppliers in a couple of years. About clients, as I mentioned, we are focusing on what we are providing on our suppliers. So on one side, we have a sort of lab that analyze and reconsider our product and services to clients to understand how we can improve in the direction of circularity. On the other, it has become also a service that we provide to clients to assess how they are performing in terms of circularity. And the third part is about assets. Assets is a really wide concept, of course. So we are trying to approach in an end-to-end perspective. So on one side is about the material we buy and how we design, for example, smart meter or other products we use. And to already tackle in the design phase the end of life. So it is something that has to be taken into consideration at the beginning. We have experience that try to recycle or remanufacture something that had not been designed is really much more difficult. So step by step, we try to recover. Of course, it's not easy because we have also assets that have been designed maybe 15 years ago. But anyway, it's an ongoing project. Then there is the operation phase, when we focus, for example, on predictive maintenance through big data, but also on optimizing the flow of our assets. And then there is a third one, that is the dismantling phase. We are shutting down many thermal power plants. Only in Italy, we have shut down 23 power plants in the last 3 years. And again, it's a huge amount of material and equipment. So also on this dismantling phase, we have defined circular economy criteria and trying to measure and follow up on this. Last point is about the model we developed. When we started 4 years ago, we scout if there was any reference approach or model, and there was not. There were many proposals, but they were not satisfying for us, because for us, circular economy from the real beginning was really covering the whole value chain. So it was about input, about business model, and about end of life. Whereas 4 years ago, the focus was above all about recycling And the other aspect that it was relevant for us, it was to consider at the same time material and energy, whereas the circular economy at the beginning was just focusing on material. And this is also in a broader sense related to the topic of decarbonization we were mentioning before. For us, operating on decarbonization and operating on circular economy is part of the same picture at the end. So we have, of course, we have a strong focus on decarbonization because we are an energy company, but we are acting on decarbonization also throughout what we do on circular economy. So we decided to develop an hour model, but this was not meant to be a proprietary model. Of course, we made it public, and we find any collaboration to discuss with other companies how to improve and how to go further. Because there have been many talking these days about having one model. Of course, this is important, but it cannot be created out of nothing. Of course, it will be based on the experience of pioneering companies that have started operating on circular economy and measuring it. Also because you cannot start a journey on circular economy without having already in place a metrics. So I think that a really important challenge is that there is a common vision on circular economy, and the metrics would follow. I see that other companies we have discussed with, Citra, for example, or Philips, we have the same vision of circular economy based on these 5 pillars. So the metric is much more easy to harmonize the metrics once you have a common vision of what circular economy is. And this is something that I think is improving year after year, because the perimeter of circular economy now is quite well agreed upon. Also because we are still in a phase when circular economy is above all about transforming the business model and having impact. So it's just not a reporting or compliance issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meini. Enel is definitely changing the game in the energy sector towards the circular economy. Next, I want to invite on stage Ms. Amanda Reiström, CEO and co-founder of Spark Sustainability. Spark Sustainability is all about helping and inspiring people make climate-friendly choices in everyday life. So Mrs. Reiström will give us a viewpoint on the connection between the consumer behavior as well as the data and circular economy. Ms. Amanda, por favor.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Hello. As was stated, my name is Amanda Reiström, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Spark Sustainability. Spark Sustainability enables data-driven climate action amongst consumers. So we are working very close to the consumers, providing them with data on how they can live more sustainably. Now, the first thing I wanted to remind us all of is that when we look at a transition towards a circular economy or any of the other systemic changes that we need to make in order to slow down climate change, we inherently see them as things that are happening on a technological or a political level, because these are huge changes. So we are very often overlooking what the role of the consumer is and how these consumers can help be agents of change in this new paradigm shift, which was said is not a sexy word, but this new change in culture that needs to happen. So we are overlooking the role of the consumers as agents for change, but what we're also overlooking is the role of the data, both the data to the consumers, which has the power to change how they act, right? This is where we form our understanding of how value is created amongst consumers, amongst what we want to buy. So how a product is marketed to me, how the data around that product is told to me is really of very, very big significance. The other thing about data and consumers is the data from the consumers, right? So this data is what can enable sharing economies. A quick example of the data that shapes our purchasing decisions. So I'm buying a car, and first it's just a car. It's either electric or it's not electric. But then something happens when we put out news about an emission scandal, like in 2015, or when the IPCC publishes a special report, when we get sexy brands and when we get big political discussions. This is all data, even though we're not thinking about it. This is data packaged into stories that are reaching these consumers. So when data is packaged into stories, it can really change how consumers view the world and what choices they make. Another thing that data can do that is really powerful when it's directed at consumers is that it can be remembered and it can form this sense of urgency. This is a data set of the mean annual temperature rate in England between 1772 and 2017. It's made by Ed Hawkins. And this data set, when you see it as a picture like this, it's super beautiful. You'll remember it, and it actually has the power to form or to impact your decisions as a consumer later in something that has nothing to do with this picture. But what we start to see with all of this is that actually, ironically enough, in this situation, we have so much data. We have too much data. And one of the challenges, actually, in discussing data directed to consumers and from consumers is this abundance. It becomes a million different stories, and it's way too much to take in. So what we start to see when working with consumers is that this data actually needs to be related to me. It needs to be my story, my data, somehow a part of my reality, right? So in this left picture, I can actually see myself in that graph. This is the percentage of CO2 emissions by world population, and they are ordered according to income. So rich is at the top, poorest at the bottom, and so it says that the poorest 50% is responsible for only about 10% of worldwide of lifestyle consumption emissions. So this picture really makes me realize that I am over-consuming a lot because I'm in that top section, living in a wealthy nation. So this picture resonates with me and where I am, and it makes me understand that I personally need to change as a consumer. The other graph here is something that is data that we got during a climate coaching program that we are currently running at Spark in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment here in Finland. So we asked participants when they started what they thought was the most challenging climate action. And now we're entering into a sphere where the data that is given back to the consumers is actually their own data. And this might change their behavior either if they feel that, oh, actually everyone else thought that this thing that's super hard for me, for instance, buying things secondhand was quite easy, like everyone else can do that, then maybe I can ask them for help. And maybe that can sort of be the little nudge that changes how you behave. Or alternatively, they can see that, okay, this is super hard for everyone as well, like flying. And now this data can start to give business and policymakers ideas about what types of new products or services or policies are needed to help these consumers, to help all of us, the citizens, make this transition into the circular economy. Because it's us. It's not only the institutions or the nations or the businesses that need to change. It's everyone, all of us, the citizens, who are actually making up the society, and we need to see ourselves in that change. So what's happening is we start to see that we need this data to be personal. What you're seeing here is the carbon donut, which has been there in the top corner the whole time. It is Spark Sustainability's own lifestyle carbon emission calculator. So this one shows you the emissions that result from your lifestyle choices. So it's the 70% that is globally, that comes from consumer choices. This is the carbon donut of my uncle, Henrik. I asked him to fill it out, so he gave the data for this by filling it out on our platform. And the tips we could give Henrik from looking at his carbon donut is we look at how big they are, and then we see where is the low-hanging fruit, and obviously where he lives and so on, how much there's a lot going into it. But so generally speaking, we could say, hey, so you should probably fly less because that's quite big. You should maybe buy more secondhand. And thirdly, do you need to own your own car or can you carpool? But what happens next when we learn a little bit more about Henrik is really interesting because he has 2 small kids, so he needs to have the right size kiddo seats in the car. and he's a freak about new technology. So actually he consumes because he wants the new tech. So none of these tips I can give him will work. So we need more of that data, of his data. We need to know who he is in order to give him tips and products and services, in order for the businesses to know what services and what products to produce, and also in order for government to know how to legislate that. We need to know a little bit more about him. I'm pretty sure one of the things that he doesn't care about is who made his dishwasher, how old it is. He just wants it to work. We're running a customer case at the moment where we are piloting or calculating the emission reduction from, instead of when a dishwasher breaks down, they send someone over there to repair it. This is not rocket science, but what is rocket science is what we could do with this if we roll it out to more consumers. So can we somehow measure, can we get consumers to want to give us that data somehow automatically, or just by, I don't know, putting it in our app that, hey, my dishwasher broke down, this is my address, please come fix it? Or is it still just easier? Because let's face it, at the moment it's so easy to go online and buy a new one, and it will be delivered to your door and they will take the old one. So that's super easy. So we need to make this other model easy. That is what we're currently working on, and we're super excited to see what happens. And I wanted to still say that I think a reason for people to want to give this data might be what was brought up here in the question from the audience, that we want to include the mental health and the health of citizens in this transition, right? So feeling like I can do something that I'm ready to do gives me a good feeling. But getting that tip that, hey, you should own a car, and I'm like, but I have to somehow, that gives me a bad feeling. That's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda. We all need some sparking to boost our good doing, or do-gooding. From personal metrics to systemic approach, let's look into mapping interactions between stocks of materials and energy in the system. I want to invite the founder of Shifting Paradigms, Hjalmar Haagsad. Shifting Paradigms is bringing metabolic analysis to guide the transition to a low-carbon circular economy. I really want to hear what that's about. So, stage is all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning, or early afternoon, everyone. Still morning. What I would like to discuss with you is the fair use of data, but also what the data does not tell us. So the stories behind the data, as well as perhaps even a case of where we might have looked at the wrong data at some point. But before doing that, let's have a quick look at how circular the world is. And this is the outcome of the first Global Circularity Gap Report, which was launched about 2 years ago, where we try to estimate how circular the world is. And the idea here is that the black box in the middle is our society. What goes in are a range of materials, purple, so ranging from minerals to fossil fuels, biomass, and ores. And as you see on the left, that's all extracted. These are all primary resources that we use on an annual basis. What comes out on the right side, after all these materials have fulfilled a range of societal needs, being housing, nutrition, communication, mobility, an important one, what comes out is mostly waste. And there's only a small part of that waste that we really hold in our hands at some point. Most of it is our greenhouse gases, which go into our atmosphere. A lot are nutrients which wash away in our surface waters, plastics dissolving in our oceans. So there's a fraction that we actually at some point hold in our hand. And part of that is incinerated, part of it is landfilled, and the remainder is actually recycled. And that's mostly, well, the recyclable materials, mostly metals, paper, glass, but also quite some organic materials, which is reapplied on the land to close the loop in the agricultural sector. And we found that what is cycled is only 9% of what we have in use on an annual basis. And that is how circular we are today. But there was the first gap report. In the second one, we wanted to go into a bit more detail and understand, well, how do we improve that 9%? How do we actually move away from the linear economy into the circular economy? what's the treatment plan? And then we realized that the flows, so this is the same picture more or less, but then smaller, the flows which go around are only about recycling, and that only tells us part of the story. But there's a lot more to tell. But we realized that in order to understand that, we had to look at something way bigger. Because what's flowing here is around 94 billion tons, but we had to look at something far bigger, which is around 890 billion tons. And that's this part. These are the stocks. These are all the materials that we've extracted over the last centuries, and that now are our buildings, our cars, our infrastructure. And that amount is a lot bigger, but it's extremely important if you want to understand where the potential of the circular economy lies. Because that is where you look at lifetime extension, about redesigning products to be able to easily repair. That's where the sharing models come in. That's where product as a service comes in. So that makes that stock extremely important. Another thing that when looking at the treatment plan, we also realized that data only tells part of the story. From Spark, we just learned that the stories are important also to reach consumers, but I think it's also just as important to reach policymakers and others that are working on the circular economy. Because the data only tells part of it. And if you look at data, you're actually to a large extent looking at the linear economy, because that's where most of the data is, simply because the linear economy consumes most of our materials, produces most waste, consumes most fossil fuels, and also emits most of the greenhouse gas emissions. So in order to understand where the potential lies, you often need to look at what is more the anecdotal or more the stories behind how our economy functions. And that's what we try to put in practice in a very sort of concrete case in the city of Almaty in South Kazakhstan. So just last week, we finalized a metabolic analysis. So we mapped out all resource flows in that city. And that looks like this. And after mapping that out, so after sort of the data exercise, we really sit down with the policymakers, with the industries, but also with a more engaged civil society to understand, well, this is what's happening in your city, but what are really the stories behind it? What are we seeing here? And also, where are the opportunities to improve? And from them, we learned about very exciting startups or even more community-based initiatives that are not depicted anywhere, that are not in the formal economy, but they are extremely inspiring, even for the municipality, which was only to a limited extent aware of what was happening in the city, and certainly didn't consider themselves to be a relatively circular place. But there's one thing I want to highlight from this picture, and that is that what you see here again are all the flows, so the minerals, biomass, metals, fossil fuels, water, but the red are the greenhouse gas emissions. And at the bottom you see the upstream, so the greenhouse gas emissions associated with products produced elsewhere. And the top red are the territorial greenhouse gas emissions. And they make up 60% of the carbon footprint of the city of Almaty, which means that the remaining, the upstream greenhouse gas emissions, so the, if you like, embedded greenhouse gas emissions in all the products and materials that are consumed in that city, they're 40%, and that's what a circular economy targets. That's what essentially we are working on. But if you realize that that's 40%, that's exactly the part that is not incentivized as strongly as much under the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement looks at territorial emissions, which are the 60%, which in the case of Almaty are mostly fuels combusted in vehicles, and the energy that they use to heat their houses. And in South Kazakhstan in winter, you need a lot of energy to heat your house. But the 40% is not considered. Also under the Paris Agreement, I mean, it is considered, but it's not incentivized as such, because also the Paris Agreement looks at territorial boundaries. And just looking at the example of Europe, Europe is nicely on track to reach its 20% reduction goal by 2020. But its consumption-based emissions, so this lower part, have actually increased with 11%. And with that way, we're not going to make it. So we need to find ways to include that 40% in, well, ideally, the modalities for international cooperation, also under the Paris Agreement. Because without it, I'm sure we'll not be able to meet, to get on a 1.5, let alone 2 degrees scenario again. Then finally, well, if you want to read more about the relation between the Paris Agreement and, or essentially climate change and the circular economy, do have a look at our blogs. And we're currently working on the third version or the third edition of the Global Circularity Gap Report, which will be launched in January this year in Davos. And what we're going to do there is essentially step out of the luxury of looking at the world, because the world doesn't have territorial boundaries. So you don't have to deal with import and export. But we're going to look at countries and compare them. And what we hope to learn from that exercise is what is the difference in circularity between a high and a low income country, and how can we explain that difference? What can they learn perhaps even from each other? But also, how do we deal with stock? How do we deal with the fact that a lot of countries are still building up their stock? They're building up their infrastructures. They're building virtually a new city every day. How do you deal with that? Because in the data, that makes you a very non-circular nation. But is that a fair way of looking at it? Or should we find other ways to represent that data in a way that is fair to everyone and to all countries? So that is a challenge for the third GAP report. And if you want to be part of that discussion, I would certainly recommend you to register at that link. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hjalmar. Flowcharts, material flowcharts make things look easy, but let's make most of them. Dear audience, next we're going to hear about the grand plans of the Netherlands. They have for measuring the change and steering society towards a fully circular economy in 2050. I want to welcome on stage the Minister of the Environment, Steti van Veldhoven.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. And I think the mere fact that we're talking about measuring and monitoring of the circular economy, it shows how far we've come and how far we are. And it shows that we're very serious about the circular economy. And one of the previous speakers said, it's a new problem. No, the circular economy is not new. Circular economy is old. Waste is new. Waste is a human invention. And the only thing is that we need data and we need new solutions to solve that problem. But the circular economy is old and waste is new, and that's why we have to solve that problem. And we all know how important it is. It has been said by many speakers. A lot has been done and a lot is ongoing. And just to show you a few examples of what is being done. This is an example of Alping. Each of us sleeps in a bed every night, so you can imagine how many mattresses we all use together. So Alping is a family-owned business in the Netherlands, and they're going towards 100% recycling of all of their materials. Jean Bouteille is a French company that's devised a system of returnable bottles for the purchase of commodities like detergents, fruit juice, cooking oil, and wine. Also, where a lot is going on. So we see that there are many interesting initiatives. But I think very rightly, the theme of also this conference this year is scaling up and speeding up. Because if we see the challenges that we have, we know that we cannot continue only with small, nice projects here and there. We need to speed up and scale up, and that is also why cooperation is so important. So how far have we got in the Netherlands with monitoring progress and steering it? Well, we are in the process of a transition towards a zero-waste economy and greater reuse of natural resources. And step by step, we are working towards making the Netherlands economy fully circular by 2050, and we want to be 50% circular in 2030. And we are working across the economy. So we have 5 main sectors: plastics, construction, the manufacturing industry, consumer goods, and biomass and food. And each of these sectors has drawn up their own sectoral plan. Their agendas prove a signal from thinking about it to actually doing it, and they're full of action points, like new techniques to completely recycle carpets, amounting to 4.5 billion square meters worldwide of carpets. New techniques to completely recycle, make new concrete from old concrete, and we've just heard about how material intensive and CO2 intensive the production of infrastructure and concrete is. So a lot is being done. If we look about what it can bring to the Netherlands, because we often talk about the costs, but let's talk a bit about the benefits. The benefits are that there are already 85,000 circular activities in the Netherlands. This is a statistic from our National Planning Bureau. It will create 500,000, we already have 500,000 jobs in the circular economy, and of these 85,000 initiatives, about 1,500 are really innovative, because we have a lot of circular economy in our traditional economies too. The bike repair shop, of course, everywhere in the Netherlands you can find bike repair shops. They are part of the circular economy. Shoe repair shops, part of the circular economy. A lot is already going on. Paper recycling, I'm sure you all have that. A lot is going on. And behind all of these anonymous figures are all really appealing stories. And I really very much liked what you said about how do we bring the consumer in and how do we translate statistics, zeros and ones, into stories. Because the stories stick and the stories move. And that's what we need. We need change, we need movement. So there are appealing stories created by people who look at their surrounding with fresh eyes and who thought there are better and smarter ways of doing this with less waste. Like the people who sought to create sustainable asphalt without fossil byproducts. And this is the first cycling path with that new material that has been laid. Or there was a person who saw vast quantities of plant residues as a potential resource. So she set to work at home, and it turned out there were applications for her product in interior construction. And a big furniture manufacturing is now interested in her. And it's that drive and that resourcefulness that is so inspiring. So what we need to do now is make sure that we get more structure and focus into all of these movements. At the moment, basically what we're seeing, and I've seen also the stands outside, and we hear it in all of the sessions, a lot are cogs being set in motion. And we want to make sure that all these cogs interlock so that the machine becomes bigger and stronger, more resilient, moving faster. And that is why in the Netherlands we drew up, on the basis, of course, of our ambition, a national implementation program with all relevant partners from government, business, and science. And it brings together many initiatives. And in this initiative, we're putting emphasis on monitoring and measuring. We are now building on things like, it was mentioned by the Commission, the European Monitoring Framework and the Sustainable Development Goals in a new system. But we should not just measure quantity. It's also very much about quality. We want to know whether we're nearing our goals, whether our actions are having the desired effects, what we should do differently. And the idea is to generate recommendations to policymakers and knowledge workers, business people and investors. And the first results of this are expected at the end of this year. And of course, with these results, I will speak to administrators twice a year. But it's not a national economy. The normal economy is not national. The circular economy is not national. We are talking international global business. So it's a very positive sign that we start cooperating with other countries, like Italy, Belgium, Germany, France, Switzerland, and of course the EU. And then next to that, lots of companies. I was very inspired also by what Enel told about what they are doing. It's actually putting it into practice, looking what it can do in a certain country, in a certain sector. So it's my ambition really to work together with all of you internationally. It is necessary to do that with the NGOs, with businesses, with other companies, and with other countries. So we shouldn't just measure the progress of the circular economy. We should also be able to steer that process. And I think that's what many of the comments which you made related to. It's nice to know what the material flows are, but unless you know how you can change the material flows or where you can make the biggest benefits, we need to get from the data to the policy options. We have to learn from each other. We have to learn from all aspects. It's not just about recycling, it's also about design for recycling. It's about reuse. How do we get all of those data on all of those parts of the circular economy? And then when we are talking about consumers, how indeed do we make sure that consumers also understand what all of these stories mean and what all of the data mean? Not the greenwashing, not the negative signal. How do we bring them on board in creating a market demand, which will then, of course, stimulate the take-up in the economy? So we don't just need a thermometer telling us how hot it is. We also need a thermostat so that we can turn and that we can change in the desired direction. And I think the framework that the EU presented in early 2018 certainly is a step in the right direction. It provides insights in how much material is being used, how much is being recycled, how many patents, crucial parts, and how many jobs there are. But if we want to scale up and speed up, we need to go further. And I think the link to the climate change agenda, I hope you've heard me say it about 5 times this conference. I hope you've heard many more people say it 5 times. I hope you are going to say it everywhere where you go. We need to link this much more firmly to the climate change agenda. And CO2 reduction of the circular economy is now not sufficiently enough entrenched in the way we measure the circular economy. Whereas it is an important tool, and it is a tool that we cannot miss. The 40%, which was just on the screen, that's exactly why we can provide a solution and why the circular economy should contribute, but then it needs to become part of this international discussion. And also, we're going to need to be strict amongst ourselves. We need to be able to find what are then cost-effective solutions to reducing CO2 in the circular economy. Because just like in energy, there are going to be more and less efficient solutions. And so we need the facts to decide what the best options are in which sector. Measuring is a great tool if you want to know where you are, but if you want to know where you want to get to, then you need to be able to take control. So what we are doing in the Netherlands is only a start. I've heard so many great initiatives here that I feel it is really time to stop the dissemination and to stop the fragmentation, is what I was going to say, of all of these initiatives. It is really time to come together. I am now on the board of PACE, and I hope that PACE could play a role in bringing together all of those partners from businesses, from NGOs, from knowledge institutes, and from governments. And let's together, as from this day, start working on this comprehensive set, which provides us all the tools that we need. And let's do it together. Because together we are smart. It was one of the biggest signs that I saw yesterday with the young people that opened this conference. And I think they were so right. So let's listen to them. Let's get started. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Veldhoven. Yeah. Thank you, Mrs. Veldhoven. You guys are doing an amazing job. And like you said, circular economy is made together. And that's why it's so great to have all of you guys here together in Helsinki on this beautiful rainy day. Next, we want your input on the session. So I see there's already some questions sent to the messaging board, but please keep coming with your excellent questions. I want to invite all the speakers back to the stage now. So please welcome Mr. Rönix, Mr. De La Fuente, Mr. Hogsad, Mr. Meini, Mrs. Reistrom, and Mrs. Sinipura. Welcome. Yeah, and if you missed the guidelines, they're there in the back. But let's get this started. Okay, there's a really good one. Really interesting presentations, but it still seems that we have metrics about inputs, outputs, and stocks. However, how or when can we tell that a country or a process or a person is circular? Once that we're circular, how can we be even more circular?
Well, if I can answer that, I think you can measure that you are more circular with the outputs. The process also help. To me, the key one is the output one. You can also look at the inputs. You mentioned that, the process itself, but the output is the key one. So we can see if we are more circular, if the loop is getting bigger, and we are using fewer resources that end up as waste or emissions in the environment.
We also know the Ellen MacArthur the butterfly thing with many loops, remanufacturing, repair, reuse. We know very, very, very little about that. So we have some indications, but I think we still have a long way to go to give us indeed the information that I think the question embedded is. There is not so much out there to really give us an idea about circularity. And we need to work on that. And there are many ways of doing that. It can be based on the type of work that you are doing. But how much do we know about design? Do we have any metrics on design? Do we know whether a product is designed in a better way? We know very little about that. So we need to work on that and make clear that is part of the solution. Informational governance, as it is sometimes called. Yeah.
Excellent. There is the next one right here. How do we get more companies entering the data game to move from theory to practical flows?
Maybe I can answer.
Yeah.
I think there is a strong movement concerning companies. There is strong engagement that is growing year after year. Even if you just compare the event here in Sitra 2 years ago and today, I think that you see a strong engagement. Of course, it is not the whole sector that move at the same time. There are, as always happen, the most advanced company that start moving, and then the sector follows on. But for example, what I was mentioning about suppliers is an example on how you can draw all your supply chain and how you can accelerate this transition. So I think that nowadays the momentum is good in this direction. Of course, there is still some criticalities related to the law, the legislation that maybe does not help circular businesses. There is also a know-how gap because, of course, a small medium enterprise has more difficulties in order to address and understand. Maybe they move to circular economy without being aware of doing it. Maybe it's just about finding more innovative solution. But still, I think that the business sector is providing a good contribution in this transition.
Yeah. Has NL thought of scaling your circular economy model to other companies as well?
Yeah, we are more than scaling ours, collaborating with other companies, of course. We are operating with many companies from other sectors, and now also the energy sector is start moving in this direction. But there are incredible examples from many sectors, I think, of companies that are strongly engaged on circular economy.
How can you compare the circularity of a product with the circularity of a service? I'm guessing there's with the metrics in behind of this one. Yeah. These are tough ones, you guys.
I mean, yeah, I think the metric does not have to be very different from even the metric that we use at the Globe. If you want to compare a service and a product, in the end, what you want to look at is how much primary resources am I using and how much waste am I producing. And whether a product is most suitable to do that or a service, I think that'll come out of the math itself. Yeah. I think the question, and that's also related, I guess the first question that was asked, the metric of how circular you are is often a very different metric that you need to look at when it comes to how do I become more circular. That's also what the minister said. The road to circularity is a very different one from understanding where you are on that road. And I think that these are two very different data sets, or I think I would even argue that for the road to circularity, you're far more looking at anecdotal information and also the stories that you refer to.
We should also not be naive in thinking that services don't have a material basis. They do, of course. You know, we carry the smartphone in our pocket and that service, and we have everything there, and we make better choices. There is a material basis in the smartphone, in the big data storage, in the energy needed for that. You know, so I find it a bit of an artificial separation to speak now, well, when we move to more service-based, all of a sudden we've got the panacea. No, we need to reflect also about the material basis of a service type model in the economy. I'm not saying that it cannot be a big contribution, but we shouldn't be naive about it.
Yeah, also because when we speak about product as a service, there is still a product behind. I mean, product as a service for a car is still there is still a physical car behind. So it's more about the ownership, the business model. It's not about making something material against something that's just digital.
And actually, if I may add, this is now drawing on my experience from a different company, but when you start making products into services, so you're still lending that same product as in the example with the car or with some little gadget, then actually what might happen is that the consumer starts to appreciate or think that it has to be of better quality and new the whole time, because now it's a service and they're paying continuously for it. So actually, it's very true what was mentioned here, that it can also be a trap. That
It's a trap, yeah.
can be.
Okay, is GDP the right metric to use in the future to measure well-being? And how can we modify it to be more connected to the circular economy? Or what can we use instead?
I can answer that. Because I worked in the GDP before, I know how it's done. I think GDP, how did you say the question? It was never meant to measure well-being.
Yep. Yeah.
This is a common misunderstanding. At the same time, so the statisticians that produce the GDPs, you are doing the wrong use of it, which is a bit of an excuse because we have expectations of what GDP is going to measure and it doesn't deliver that. What we are trying to do in statistics is not to improve the GDP, but to look at alternative complementary measures, like the monitoring framework I presented before, SDG indicators, so looking at other measures, and also having a discussion with the guys that do the GDP about what is missing there, how can it be improved. But improving the GDP is not going to be the solution. We need alternative measures that complement it.
We are working together with Eurostat and a couple of other partners in natural capital accounts in Europe, which look at stocks and flows. Because for the moment, we've got the economy with GDP, and we know the whole story about why it's functional and why it's not functional. We've got on social capital some indicators of poverty, distribution, all of these things. But on natural capital, it's very tough to get a serious understanding of how this is going. So my idea would be that we can say the French economy grew by 3.4%. They would be really happy with that. Socially, poverty went up or down, or distribution, Gini coefficient, and natural capital went down 1.7%. This is not sustainable economic performance. And we're not there, but we're working on that. We will come with experimental natural capital accounts for Europe in collaboration with Eurostat and others pretty soon.
Yeah, excellent. We still have time for one more question, and let's take this one directly from the audience live. We have the mic lady on the side. Please be... Okay, we have one right there.
Hello, my name is Henry, independent consultant in innovation sustainability. One of the biggest issues when it comes to efficiency and circular economy is the rebound effect. We have a tendency that when we are well off and we save money, we tend to consume more again. So from $100 savings, about 70 goes back into consumption. There's been a study on that. So unless the product or service is 100% CO neutral, then it adds back to the consumption. So how to measure it?
Well, I think we are so far in the future to get into that problem that we have so many things ahead of us and more in the short term that we have not considered the problem yet. But it's clear this effect exists. You can also see it in very different contexts. For instance, as people get older, they live longer years, but they have different type of diseases, and this has different effects. So, but for the transition to the circular economy, we have not reached that moment yet. I hope we reach it soon. It would mean that we have advanced a lot, and we have to face that problem at that time.
Thank you. Let's give our speakers a big round of applause once more. And next we have still Mr. Hans Breinich to summarize the whole session.
Okay, well.
Simple as that.
I think from this session, it's clear that in this field of how we understand circularity at different levels and scales, what sort of information we have about it at the production stage, the consumption stage, at the sort of macroeconomic stage, that it is very important that we improve that element and that we construct that knowledge base. Secondly, I also think we saw really nice examples of how you can incorporate that fundamentally in either your business models or your decision making, or at the level of working with citizens or citizen consumers. But I also think we made it very clear that there are serious gaps there. If you think of circularity from the design stage to then all the stages in between, we need to work on filling these gaps. Filling the gaps cannot be an excuse to not get our act together as soon as possible and act. But we need to be conscious that if we really want to steer and fine-tune the steering and know very well how far we are along and what the side effects are, the unintended consequences, the intended consequences, we need to improve on the metrics and on the data. And it's thrilling to see in this conference how many initiatives there are. Some extremely out of the box and very innovative, but at the end of the day, and I think that's the role that Eurostat plays and that we play as well, we also benefit from a sort of uniformity there that is accepted, that gives legitimacy to the messaging coming from policymakers and from businesses, and that creates trust in the system. Just like we are measuring emissions, carbon emissions, we need to know when countries commit to European targets that they are really doing what they promised to do, and we have a general metric for that we use. We don't have that for the circular economy yet. And if this is really important, and it is, we need to build trust and legitimacy also in the knowledge system. So I think we've got our work carved out for us when it comes to that part of it. I think we also need to become better at communicating it, because these flowcharts for the in-crowd, and we are the in-crowd, they speak to us, but it's clear that the color bar scheme may speak in different ways to other people. So how do we connect complexity to messages that do not reduce complexity, but explain complexity in different ways so that we can motivate everybody in our society to take this seriously and understand it and grasp what role they can play in this. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank the partners for this session, Citra for organizing it. I think it was great to have so many people here for ones and zeros. I think we saw very few zeros in the debate. It was mostly ones. So let's add them up, and then we will go in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Franis, for the excellent summary. And thank you, everyone. You've been an excellent and active audience for all the ones and ones and ones and some zeros. And we know circular economy isn't just ones and zeros, but they can sure help us make a big impact and at least measure it, what we're doing and going to the right direction. But it can also help data enthusiastic, but also us humans, so that we can make it better and fair. But you can continue the metrics discussions over some nice vegetarian lunch. And data people will be found at the Citra stand if you want to continue these discussions over there. But Godspeed now.